What's up, guys? It's Dan. So, many of you have requested the first video to be about Endless Mode and the DLC, and here it is. So, I apologize for the length that it took. I wanted to do a lot of testing and see where I was, and so I've used both accounts, and I've done a lot of testing, but not a lot of really try hard to dig deep through getting to like 1,000 or 2,000 or anything like that. I really haven't tried to do that. I was just really trying to grasp the changes in the classes and the overall mechanics and what we're looking at as far as who's going to be best or who is best suited, not necessarily best, but maybe best or better suited versus other classes when we talk about the endless mode. So I want to go into a few things, and I guess we'll start with the mercenaries that are available. So one thing to keep in mind is if you're going to hire mercenaries to go through endless mode, which, I mean, you should if you don't have the right people or the right class compositions, it's perfectly fine. But in going through with somebody from the stagecoach in order to do endless mode, they're going to have the shard mercenary and you aren't able to remove it. So they are going to take 10% shard loot. But as a trade-off, they don't take up a roster slot, and the only quest they will do will be endless mode. You can't use them for anything else. So just kind of keep that in mind. So it is worth it. However, like I've pulled, if we can take a look, I pulled a couple that have had some pretty good quirks. Like she has Hippocratic, which is extremely strong on the Vestal. And then he had Luminous, which is really good on the Jester as well. And then I got Twilight Dreamer and Natural Swing on this Leper. So that's pretty good. I mean, Twilight Dreamer isn't as good on the Leper as what it could be on some other people, but still pretty good. So you can get some pretty good quirks. You can treat these guys pretty much like normal, except for Shard Mercenary. You cannot pull that out of there. So anyway, as we go and look overall at Endless Mode and what it is and what are some of the challenges you're going to face. So your main two challenges that you're going to run into are going to be stress mitigation and then also disease. Those are going to be the hardest things probably for you to deal with the vast majority of party compositions. Disease is a little more situational. Stress happens all the time, obviously, and even with the changes in crit, I still find that you are getting more stress than the crits are able to relieve with almost all the classes that I brought. So I've tried every class in endless mode just to see who would do the best, and generally speaking, there's two that you absolutely have to take, in my opinion. You don't necessarily, I guess you don't have to take this one. You don't have to take the Jester, but you do have to take a Vestal. It's just head and shoulders above the Occultist for many reasons, but one of the things I want to bring up that I would highly recommend is bringing Dazzling Light. Having your Vestal being able to stun when you're in this dungeon is extremely helpful, and on top of that, you are probably not going to be able to do a lot of damage with Judgment, as one of the drawbacks to bringing the Vestal is you're typically trinketing for a strong heal, and when you do that, let's say you bring Sacred Scroll as one of them. If you're bringing Sacred Scroll, keep in mind you're going to do 33% less damage, and that's, when you're talking about an ability that does 10 damage and it goes from doing 10 to now 6 or 7, it does add up. So I think the stun is almost a little bit better to utilize to help manage through the fight. So the Jester isn't an absolute must-take, but he absolutely does help. So he helps in, obviously, that he can mitigate stress, and he can do that through both crits and then also by buffing for it. This is a pretty strong new trinket that he has that adds to his reduction in or I should say, it increases his ability to relieve stress when you play his song. But he's extremely strong in that he does crit. He's pretty crit heavy now with some of the changes to him, and Obviously, he has the abilities when you camp and when you're in combat to relieve the stress. But I really don't find the Jester is that necessary until probably 100 to 200 mobs in. I think you can, if you just are shooting for 100, I think you can get away with not even using him personally. Because it's pretty easy up until 100. So that being said, Leper commonly is seen as one of the best ones, if not the best, as far as a tank or a front row class would be. I don't know that the Leper's as good as what people say, but he is much stronger than he was a long time ago, and he's almost catered for this mode, in that his Hue is able to take out the first 2 rows very quickly. He's got high HP. As long as you have him either trinketed or quirked for accuracy, he's pretty strong. I mean, there's a lot of different abilities you can use with him, which I won't, go into that much depth, but he's pretty strong. And commonly, I'd say, if you ask anybody, these are the 3 they're going to tell you that are closest to must takes. Now, if you're looking at going 400, 500, 600 deep, this is one of the parties that seem, I would say it's probably going to run, you'd probably set it up this way, but truthfully it doesn't really matter that much. You can organize them in a lot of different ways and be successful, but bringing the Plague Doctor, because of the fact that it's able to remove diseases, whether it's his own or it's somebody else with leeches, makes the long-term part of this significantly easier. And in order to get, I'd say if you're looking at 400, 500, or 600, it would be a lot better to have a Plague Doctor to take care of those diseases. Also, I mean, they're able to stun. Obviously, they have the strong blights and even a bleed from the 3rd, 2nd, or 1st position. So depending on where you put them, the bleed is strong. They can clear corpses, but that shouldn't be an issue if you have somebody very strong in the front line like the Leper to do a ton of damage. So, whereas I don't think the Plague Doctor is a necessity, but I'm not, looking to shoot for 1,000 or 1,500 kills. Same thing with the Jester. They're not really a necessity. The Vestal absolutely is. The Jester for longer term is extremely beneficial and probably a necessity. And then the Leper's strong, but again, not the best. I will say somebody I feel that got a lot of love for this is the Man-at-Arms is really good. So, outside of Vestal, Leper, Jester, so if, let's say we take the Plague Doctor out of it, this is probably what I feel is one of the strongest compositions that you can start with. But another one that's solid would be this. And this is really surprisingly good. Having the Man-at-Arms, having him do bolster really reduces a lot of the stress you take. The command, again, for additional crits, accuracy to help the Leper out. I don't know that you have to use guard. Bellow you really don't want to play with. Rampart can be okay for a stun, but you can, if you are using this buff target with command and then you're guarding, what happens is somebody gets a huge damage buff. So someone like the Shield Breaker, who you would commonly think doesn't do enough damage, all of a sudden becomes really, really strong with some of her abilities, and that she's able to hit really hard that way with his protection. So this is one I thought that was really underrated. Now, the drawback to this party is long-term disease is going to catch up with you, and then also burst damage isn't necessarily there. So on certain boss fights, you'll know that you need burst damage, and on certain boss fights it doesn't matter as much. You can slowly but surely, break through the spawns or the adds that the bosses are spawning. But there are certain fights where, and you guys know, especially when you get to the darkest dungeon, spoiler alert, mobs that are in there, they're tough if you can't hit them or get them down quickly. The longer the fights last, the more stress punishing it is typically on fights like that. So that's the drawback to this party. Now, the drawback, if we go back and we'll talk about the quote-unquote meta party, excuse me. So let's go back and we'll talk about, commonly seen as one of the more meta parties. The drawback here is overall row 4 damage, and if you get shuffled and the Leper's in the back, it can be a little painful to get forward. So shuffle you take a beating on those, but primarily anytime you need to hit row 4, like the Hag, for example, becomes a little more difficult with this type of a party. The Hag would probably wreck this party. But again, you're rolling the dice at a certain extent. There is no such thing as the perfect party. It's what I'm giving you guys is a few suggestions on how, without, the worst possible RNG ever, what would take you the farthest. So I think this is one, like we just went through the Man-at-Arms. Now people are probably going to bash me for this, but I will say that the Abomination is severely underrated in this scenario, especially when they have Slugger or they have something like Photomania where the stress is reduced. Steady. Abilities like that make the Abomination really, really strong. And, I mean, this is another party I've had some success with that I thought things went really well for a long time before anything really became an issue. Again, disease is going to be an issue. Stress relief could be a little more of an issue because you do have the Abomination, and especially with religious characters, the Abomination is going to cause more stress to them. When you talk about the Jester, and if you were to use Finale, if you notice now you get plus 100% stress. So that's another thing that can hurt you. But this party was one of the more fun ones, I thought, and I was really impressed with the Abomination. Even though longer term his stress is gonna hurt you, but I thought that party was pretty good. A couple tips that I can throw out there that may help if you are struggling with disease. Keep in mind when you do see the pigs or anybody who has disease, you can throw up your herbs, which will give you that disease resist. So that'll help you hopefully a little bit. Realistically, what I would tell you to do is run with a party that you think is going to be fun for you, because if it's not a fun party and you're in it 3 or 4 hours, nobody's winning anything. You're not happy anyways because you're playing characters that you're not really having fun with. But if you look overall at how long they're going to take, if you're at 116 to even up to 200, you're probably 2 to 3 hours into something. So play with a party that you enjoy, or characters or heroes that you enjoy. I just want to give a couple quick honorable mentions so I can keep this under 15 minutes. Especially with his new trinket, the Highwayman's pretty strong as a support person for, if you were to run the Leper here. The Highwayman's pretty strong. Again, he can't get rid of disease, so that's a drawback. The Shield Breaker we already talked about is pretty good. The Hellion not as good as what a lot of people would expect. I don't find the Hellion is as necessary or as strong. Same thing for the Bounty Hunter. I don't find the Bounty Hunter as strong. The Flagellant is very... it's polarizing. I could see how he'd be very, very good, but I didn't have a lot of luck with him because I either felt like he was feast or famine. Like he was always fully healed and I couldn't get anybody to hit him, or he was on death's door and everybody else was fully healed. Another drawback is if you're bringing a Vestal and they're using Divine Heal, or Divine Comfort, I'm sorry, where you're healing the party, and you really want him to be under 40% to get some of the best use out of him, and you're healing him and you're constantly healing him to top him off, he's not as useful as what you would think. I see a lot of people talking about how the Houndmaster is great. I think the Houndmaster's okay, but I don't think he's as good as what people talk about. The Occultist is pretty shit. At least in my opinion, I don't think the Occultist is good at all. But one of the things I wanted to mention is to talk slightly about the Aquarian, or the Antiquarian, rather. If you are bringing the Antiquarian, keep in mind that you do get 15% more shards when you're collecting shards if the Antiquarian's in your party. So she's worth consideration if you're just doing grinding runs to get through some things and utilize her. So keep that in mind. So thanks guys for watching. That's pretty much all I wanted to cover in this video. The next few videos, what I'm going to do is break down the trinkets that are on the wagon, and we'll talk through where I feel the first few you should buy when it comes to these. And then I will go through the updates and the changes in the classes, probably one class at a time. I'll make some quick videos so that I'm able to share with you guys what I think. Anyway, thanks for your patience. I wanted to wait for some of the balances that came out last week before I finished writing the script. So thanks very much for your patience. I really appreciate it. I hope you guys are enjoying this DLC as much as I am. I think it's awesome. And I'll see you in the next video.